Hello everyone. I would like to talk about today the concept of new lanterns. And the reason I want to talk about new lanterns because that is a perfect metaphor for a movement of man's actions that is coming. And what that means is that when man observes his action, his future has some basis in him postulating that action. So regardless of any postulation or any way of holding thought and shape and form and understanding, we want to visit a sense of our being that is novel. So we want to find the new among everything that we are considering. So a new consideration. How does a new consideration happen when you're already a considered individuality? Well, a new consideration occurs when you observe the consideration. And so the observance of consideration means to look through the eyes of a very fluent being. In other words, how would you exist if you allowed yourself anything? And there is no right and wrong here because this is simply an abstraction of how your thought invites itself to a greater demonstration. Your task is very simple. It is not one where you are late or behind. It is not one limited to space or time, but it is one that is relevant to self-understanding that aligns all that you think is meaningless and basking in impossibility. You know? There is a movement within man which is his greater recognition in the eyes of all that is. Therefore, how you encompass all that you know is really simply how life presents itself. And so begin working with your mind and how your thoughts are always initiating new realms because you are required to consider your sense of expansion. Thought is kept there by a sense of requirement of being. And so there is an urge to exist in which, in the fundamental awareness of that urge, we are no longer having our thoughts limited by causal and effectual, I guess, a cause and effect relationship, but in a sense, we are recognizing that the voice of man was always heard in an instant. The greater voices of even man's passing as well. Man must allow himself to be expressed naturally, comfortably, and very insightfully. So you want your days to be insightful so that all that is happening around you is implying the greater momentum of where your life is being directed. So whatever you're seeing is meaningful because your sense of purpose is one that is found in every moment. Now, we sometimes forget who we are, and this happens because we get engaged in our work. And so you look at certain specifications and you suddenly see, wow, the graffiti wall has a picture of your face on it. So you have kind of been pulled and pushed to certain reality simply because that is how life has gotten involved with you and you have gotten involved in life. The way your life is requires great acknowledgments by you. Remember, great leaders have the ability to acknowledge greatness within not just themselves, within others. That's why it's a natural thing. That's why leaders in some moment of their being recognize that they are the moment of their being. And so the moment has infinite possibilities and infinite combinations of form in which the body of man is one of them. So when you look at how your moment is constructed and deconstructed, you recognize subtler viewpoints in which existence is being implied through a more multidimensional sense of being. This is simply aspects of man's mind getting to remember itself. Existentially, you are not stuck in the cycles that you're continuing. And so when you take responsibility for every act of existence, that is when there is an awakening within the dream. It is very crucial to not get distracted when your sense of concentration has a very high intensity and natural requirement. What that means is certain times when we're doing certain things, we feel intuitively a sense of meaning, which really is actually the amplification of our intuition into action, that we suddenly recognize that we are not just one moving part in this whole thing, but we are just that which is keeping it together. When you recognize how reality is kept, you become fascinated by how words have really been the providers of imagery. And so we have television, which is providing different screens, and we also have thoughts which can be observed from different aspects of your memory in regards to how you're associating with the form in the present moment. So the realm of thought is something to talk about because it is an observance of man's communication that teaches, greater ways that man can communicate. Self-initiation means that you are progressing to more existential allowance. That means throughout your whole life, life is not feeling like an opposition, but it is feeling as if life is carrying you to a more beautiful rhythm. And so resonance takes an imagery that shows you an intelligence of beauty that cannot keep your ideas linear, because you are recognizing your non-linear self. And your non-linear self is a very instant view of your creation. In other words, the way you're keeping this consideration of form present, just like how you perhaps look at something in front of you and it's there in your reality, our realities are kept by greater senses of attention, which for the individual become different aspects of self. So the different senses of self, which combine to become a personality for someone, actually become a natural flow where the person is no longer associating with ideas, but is just an existing movement in the silence of all that is. It's a very beautiful awareness of presence. Because your personality is important, but it is also important for it to naturally grow into whatever you have to do. So that means every moment of your behavior and attitude and action requires to be one that is honest, authentic, and in that honesty and authenticity, you have the existential comfort of the silence and stillness of the pond that reflects greater limitless skies. You need to be playful with how you're allowing yourself to view things. For man has many views, but only one view to view it all. Let the patterns of how you are designed in this existence become evident to you by the simplicity of you letting go of all expectation to simply see what is there. I hope in listening to this talk, you remember yourself. For after a point in which new lines are found, you're no longer just an awareness of an individual body, but an awareness of a collectivity with not just the presence of every body, but with the ability to also co-create a new sense of fascination and direction in the reality that one longs to belong to, but then beautifully transcends. Now, how new lanterns become relevant is that you look at the symbology of life, the quality of life, and before you end anything that you have began, you very peacefully and gracefully shape possibility for yourself. We can see that as the individual begins to recognize his more collective sense of being. In other words, as your consciousness that has associated with individuality dissolves in greater relationships and views of its own self, you will see that there will be a greater ability in conceiving a sense of other. So as we get a greater ability in conceiving and acknowledging and confronting self, we at the same time are getting a greater ability of conceiving and confronting a sense of other, which can be more of an extraterrestrial interest. Now, we don't want to talk about things in the way that we shape them externally outside of us to the point that there is no knowing from us that can have meaning. What that means is that at times the problem you create for yourself, you make the problem, parts of it very real and parts of it unreal. And so it is the reality of the being that really chooses where his eyes are looking at. Reality at first confines itself to walls simply to learn of the design of closing and opening planes of reality. So do not think that the concept of learning, for example, is something that cannot be lit anew. Your intelligence is also changing, so the way we are grasping knowledge is changing. So we will no longer have teachers from the old, but teachers our own age teaching us. Because that is the understanding, that is the clarity, that is the more similarity in reality. Because if we have teachers teaching us old ideas, then we fall into our own confusion. Because when we ask them, they cannot understand how the changes of our sciences today could suddenly be so vague, for example. You ask what a black hole is, and in its understanding, you see the black hole in the curiosity of quantum physicists. You simply see how there's a sense of unknown which they're not trying to acknowledge because it is not shaped. The sense of unknown is actually a self-reflective quality of how you exist and how your individuality is experiencing your collective consciousness. The fear that you create for yourself is simply the transcendence of the survival that has been individually received. So you receive different views within your eye. Similarly, how I am looking now, by having awareness to different scenes and aspects of my memory, simply the flow of expression that comes through is one that ignites itself. In other words, the activities of my past are still continuing. The great work is carried with a greatness that does not see an end when it is always a beginning. And so you walk in cities and in areas no one has gone, and you light up new lanterns. You don't light up lanterns for anyone else. You bring a new idea simply because you want to land it on this plane. You want to be that man who could bring life's greatest inspirations into the form of reality where others could also be inspired. Because you see, what is the most efficient act? It is not blabbering about truth in very limited states of belief and disbelief. It is about exciting your being so that you're too wondrous that you can't even have time to ask for truth or what is really true. You simply see that the moment is the truest origin of all that you know. And so this is why, again, the Zen master's smile becomes meaningful. The yogi perceives that in the movement of his body and in the centering of his sense of place, in that observance, he gives him permission, he gives himself in a sense permission to see more of the transitory nature of existential form. So what that means is that similar to how you are one sense of individuality confronting collectivity, you can also confront yourself from another modality of the same thing. And so it becomes a very necessary, but at the same time very unnecessary act. Because the necessity is for you to get introduced to a sense of experiential range and sensitivity. You need to see that life is giving you the building blocks so that you can extract the meaning that is inspiring you beyond any ideas of any other man. How's it going? So pay attention to how your knowing is present, because it is not one that is based really on your personality. It doesn't matter how you're behaving or what your attitude is. It really matters how aware of your attitude and behavior you are. And so responsibility must be done through the compassion and the omniscience of observance that knows that it is an allowance beyond that which is disallowed. And so there are some existential leaders, you can put them in any cage and they will transform the cage into a garden of beautiful possibilities. And so even the Buddha, as I have said the story before, had a modality, had a view, had an experience of a reality while he sat down by the tree where all the darkness and enemies of his mind shoot arrows. All these demon armies and whatnot, all these symbols and archetypes of madness and chaos and evil, they shoot arrows. And as these arrows are being shot, in an instant of his knowing of where he is centered as an existential unified presence, in an instant all the arrows in that reality of his vision as he sat by a tree with his eyes closed turned into lotus flowers. And so you see that this ability is present because I have engaged with thought. And if you want to make thought an external thing and think that something is communicating with you, you can, but you will suddenly be introduced a bit roughly to what the real nature is. And the reason you'd be introduced a bit roughly, because you were confused when you began the communication. How clear you are in your sense of communication really depends on how authentically and naturally and comfortably you're communicating. I know that if I'm not comfortable, I cannot communicate. Well, how do I create comfort? By bringing self-awareness, by bringing my attention to my core, to silence and stillness, to my sense of breathing. And so that vastness of space, that sense of being present really emanates its own design. And when I say emanates its own design, it carries on that which you must do. New lanterns will become new branches of knowledge which man is exploring through revealing the treasures within self. It is an internal exploration which reconfigures externality into ways and methods and structures where man can utilize that knowledge. Okay? An engineer works with what is present and builds the greatest possibility. And the greatest possibility is one that is not shaped but always inspired towards a sense of reaching the unshaped through the greatest expansion of shape. Hopefully, we can see more people transferring, more engineers, more people who are taking much more intense focus or concentration in regards to design and engineering, for them to go by nature. Make your office outside. Have the compassion and the comfort of having nature's harmony, because then inspiration is whispered to you like by the wind. It is just beautiful. It is not something that is external, but an internal knowing that that reality is present. And because you have an internal knowing of many realities being present, how it occurs is that your activation is simply you remembering yourself. So when you remember yourself in different states of being, you realize that the essence of your knowing is same. And so the reason it's multidimensional, because there's a conception that requires a multidimensionality to be made aware of non-existentially. However, that is for another different talk, how we introduce ourselves to non-existence. Because it is not one that we can really talk about. I hope in knowing that you are here, you receive the existential comfort that now is the beautiful opportunity for you to act. And act means not trying to change the world, but begin small. And what that means is, remember, you're not here to use shapes and imagery to create a very huge expectation of yourself, which you get depressed by because you're not there. You're actually here to engage every moment. So the way the CEO is working is that the CEO is not thinking about everything months ahead in a very like concentrated and agitated way, but is simply allowing things to occur by being a bit more sensitive and taking his time mindfully. Because with mindfulness, you begin untying the knots. And as the knots untie, you see that you are allowing yourself greater ability to experience yourself. And in that allowance, there is such a hue, such a glow, that you have not just lit up new lanterns, but the sense of novelty is a reintroduction to a greater memory. And so the memories of starlight are simply how man is aware of existence. When his eyes are open, in his sleep. Causality has its own matrix of display, but once you take away the hindrances of who you really think you are, in other words, you no longer judge yourself with a limited view, but you take an integrative allowance and knowing to do what you are to do, then there is a profound happening where you see that the moment is calling you. It is no longer an intermediary, an external source, a shape, a symbol. It is a moment of knowing that is calling you. So you jump off your seat and you become perhaps like a man of great ability like Guru Padmasambhava, who simply at a certain point in his life just had a vision of what was happening or what kind of havoc was happening on another side or in another nation, and he simply walked there. As simple as that, as if life told them, all right, you who are taking existential responsibility, you who are inspired to work with the great flows of life, this country needs help. And so Guru Padmasambhava begins walking. And so he was a very profound being because his ability was simply how he introduced himself to realities. In other words, some beings, the way they introduce themselves to you simply enlightens you because it is a way of moving you past their conditioning. So simply how beings materialize are affecting the consciousness of all those things around it that are having individual realities. All these individual realities and simultaneous presences spiral into many flows, and it's a very different pattern because you begin seeing how much ability you have for simultaneous confrontation, where the individual is no longer feeling individual. You talk to people, it is as if you're not you, you're not them, but you are with all, and you're moving and you're flowing, and so your voice is carrying you to new surprises and, in a sense, new lives of those around you who require you to go light up their lantern. And light up their lantern, communicate about how new lanterns are required, and new lanterns are simply a new view in the lives of people. In other words, we do not just want to say bless you, we want to also bring profound new ideas that are emanating from the core of our authenticity. We are not angry men, but we are men who require greater self-awareness to be activated in a greater way. Because man's consciousness has the potential to create experiential points of being in his moment, which are not limited to time and space because they're aware of the veil through the veil, through being the veil. In other words, what is aware when there's a veil between you? It is the veil. So you must understand the nature of your illusion by looking clearly at how you are extracting meaning and value from the forms and changes and relationships in your life. Because as you acknowledge yourself with a greater ability to confront infinite change, within your knowing and self-awareness, you are your own freedom. you will see it's as if there's a sense of clarity, there's a sense of emptiness. You no longer are bothered by the words of others because they have become just like the sound of a distant bird. And so as you find yourself walking on a beach with the whitest sand, you look at the water that is continuing without a sense of wanting to do something. When you observe the silence in nature, it is very free because nature is not trying to change you, even though your nature of being is changing. But we do not want to talk about that change because in an instant that sense of change breaks. Therefore, our greatest leaders are simply those who lead themselves through their most authentic, honest, and compassionate expression. Man is ready to behave with an efficiency that can bring him greater gifts. As many new lanterns are found, as many lanterns are lit, as the silence of the night continues with a gentle glow, you will see that your ability to co-create through many ways that you acknowledge yourself will be creating ability for you because they will be expanding your vision of a world. And so the profundity of observance is that it continues through emptiness, and in that silence many treasures are revealed to simply turn into a teardrop of joy that has just pilgrimaged out of a very deep knowing of self. Self-remembrance will simply shift your attention because you will remember, you will see why you are here. In other words, you go to your friend's party and if nothing's happening, you should ask, why are you here? And so if there's a little bit of sense of boredom, little bit of sense of instability, ask why stability and charge into the unknown to recognize the greater potentials of your own action. Initiate yourself by really observing the light that you are. For the hue that man emanates is the platform to a new multidimensional view. For totality could never be total. You will see that as one leaf falls, you will gain a greater appreciation for what is planted in front of you. You will recognize that there is a gentleness in how thought is presented to you, and through that gentleness you can begin confronting more passage of idea, more transition of thought, more ability to in a moment have greater knowing, but a knowing that is intuitively kept. So having so much trust in life that everything that you observe in your moment is efficient, sufficient in the most interesting way. Because if you are not self-aware, then you are living in a world where you have covered your face, and your true face is one of transcendent expression. You will see there's a beauty in self-discovery. And so with the greatest blessings, may the ears of man spark new lanterns. For there is much to see before dawn. Is revealed. Let great existential allowance guide you. If you are subjected to a subject or an idea, observe it with an existential comfort that knows that you can always get off the seat when you don't like it. And you always can. And you do not know the ability of how man's concentration can originate magnificence. Namaste.